All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. So we're continuing in Sidkas HaTzadik in Os Samich Beis. So we're picking up on page Kuf Nun Aleph. It's the same. It's the same still PDF that I put out on the chat. I think last week. Yeah, I think last week. So remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So Rab Tzaddik in this particular Os has been speaking about the concept that there are certain midos, certain character traits, and really we're speaking more in the realm of spiritual character traits, which were possessed by certain individuals, then passed down to their families, and after that became the purview of the rest of Klal Yisrael. Right? And so we've been going through different people who possessed these incredible midos, and we begin to see as we go through this os I'll call for lack of a better term, the spiritual DNA of Klal Yisrael. So we saw the Chesed of David HaMelech. We saw the Tzidkus of Yosef. So just to remember kind of a little bit so far what we've done up until now, we saw that Yaakov Avinu possessed the Midah of Yisrael. And Yisrael represents the ability to go ahead and find one's inner Kedusha. That no matter how many wrong turns or mistakes I make in life, there's an inner pocket of holiness that's inside of me that I always have the ability to draw from. And I always have the ability ultimately to interact with and to somehow access in order to be able to lift myself up even in the aftermath of terrible life mistakes. We then saw the tzidkus. Yosef was called a tzaddik. So we spoke about the idea that tzaddik represents sexual purity, the idea that even if a person is bombarded with desire, and even if a person is bombarded by lust, and a person is pulled in a whole bunch of different directions, Yosef teaches us the ability to maintain our morality even in the face of a persistent threat to that morality. We saw David HaMelech represented the concept of Chasidus, was a Chassid. What does it mean ultimately to be a Chassid? So David HaMelech taught us this idea of having a singular focus in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That to make the Ratzon Hashem, to make the will of the Ribbon Shalom, to make the desire to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu paramount in our lives. That brings us now to Levi. So we're on page Kuf Nun Aleph, in the Be'uriah Chasidos, the left-hand side. The Levi Zachal L'Shem Tahar. Levi was Zocha to Tara. That was Levi's Midah, Tar. So what does it mean to be Tahar? What is that? What is that? In other words, we understand what the word means vis-a-vis, let's say, Tuma, right? That ultimately Tara is the opposite of Tuma. But for example, again, if you don't have to look, I'll read it to you in the footnote. He quotes over here from Bamidbar, Kachas halaviyah mitoch b'nei Yisrael v'tiharta osam. So the Torah says, take the Levium from the midst of the Jewish people and purify them. So Levi is associated with Tara. So what's the pshat? What's Tara? And the Rebbe says something so profound. He says, Dahainu, Litaher es hayetzer hara al yidei yiras Hashem tahora. This is such a beautiful statement. He says, what does Tara mean? Tara is the ability to go ahead and purify the yetzer hara through yiras Hashem. Through yiras Hashem, through an awe and reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person is able to purify. Yetzer Hara. I will say, if you think about this, it's a strange statement. To purify the Yetzer Hara, in other words, we assume generally, what am I supposed to do with my Yetzer Hara? What am I supposed to do with it? Obliterate it, right? Just get rid of it, right? Sublimate it. Purify the Yetzer Hara. So I will say here, Reb Tzaddik is teaching us something which is one of the tenets of Chasidus, which we've seen before in Reb Tzaddik's writings, but actually not so long ago in one of the previous osos, the idea that the Yetzer Hara is just the corruption of one's inner koach. See, in life, there are kohos, there's energy. And the choice we have in life is how to use that particular koach. The Yetzer Hara is the drive to corrupt a particular koach. So I'll give you a good example, and this is why perhaps the Rebbe doesn't say this, but perhaps this is why Levi is considered the example of this. For example, so we know the episode with Levi, right? The most well-known episode with Levi, two well-known episodes with Levi. Number one is Shimon and Levi, back in Bereshis, after Dinah is abducted and raped. Shimon and Levi go in and they wipe out the city of Shechem. That's episode number one. Episode number two was the episode of Pinchas, right? The episode of Pinchas, right? Pinchas is also a member of the tribe of Levi. Episode number three, Korach, this week's parasha, also a member of the tribe of Levi. So we'll say, what's the common denominator between Levi in Bereshis Shechem, Pinchas, I'm going a little bit out of chronological order, Korach and Pinchas? They're all expressions of what we would call anger, right? Or intense emotion. All intense emotion. There's two out of the three were expressed positively. I also want to point out with the episode with Shimon and Levi wiping out Shechem, Yaakov Avinu gets upset at them. But if you notice that when Yaakov Avinu gets upset at his sons, he says to them, Achartem osi. He gets upset because he claims you have put me in danger with the local nations, with the local residents. If you notice, he doesn't chastise the act. He doesn't chastise the act. He doesn't say what you did was wrong. He said you've placed the family in danger, which is very interesting. Because the act of punishing evil, right? The act of standing up against evil, that Yaakov Avinu doesn't seem to say is bad. That could be very positive. Korach allows his anger ultimately to blind him. Okay, anger, jealousy, and Pinchas. Pinchas again acts in a state of kanos, which is righteous anger, we call it whatever, zealotry, and ultimately stands up for the kavod of Hashem. So we'll say, so in life, there are the way the Yetzer Hara works is the Yetzer Hara sees the kochos, the energies that I have, and corrupts them and pushes me to engage or to utilize those activities or to utilize those kochos in a detrimental fashion. The koach of Levi is the ability to take even that which is a potentially detrimental koach and to turn it into something positive. I will say, what is the most detrimental trait a person could possess? Anger. Anger. The Rambam says in Hilchos Deos that kas is the most dangerous midah. The Gemara says, if you get angry, it's as if you worship idolatry. What does that mean? What does that mean? So the Rishonim point out, very simple. When you get angry and you lose control over your temper, you could end up doing anything. Everyone has had moments of anger like this. Some of us have sustained anger like that, where you just lose control. Totally lose control. And when you do that, there's no rational thought. And when you do that, you say things that are horrible, you do things that are horrible, and a person could even come to worship idolatry. It could absolutely happen in a moment of incredible kas. The Gemara says. So Levi possesses this unique koach to be able to what the Rebbe calls letaher es hayetzer hara. To be metaher the Yetzer Hara. To be metaher the Yetzer Hara means to take kochos that the Yetzer Hara usually corrupts and to go ahead and reorient them to be used in a positive fashion. That's the koach of Levi. And Levi ultimately gave over, Hinchel gave over this particular maila to his offspring afterwards. V'chein Aaron zacha b'huz v'zaro acharav l'shem kadosh kimavor le'el sha'achar, turn the page, sha'achar shezacha bo hu atzmo hinchilu li'olam l'chol zaro sheyesh b'em kedusha miyuchades. I am b'zarish korach. Okay, so the Rebbe goes on and he explains that I will say this is really, if you think about it, an incredibly overwhelming yesod. So remember, the story is always the same. The story always is an individual goes ahead and acquires the midah, passes on that midah to his family, and then after that midah becomes part of the family, then ultimately it's passed on to the klal, it's passed on to the collective. So Levi cultivates within himself this sense of tara, this sense of purity, which we're translating now as the ability to be metaher your Yetzer Hara, the ability to take those kochos, which the Yetzer Hara normally corrupts, uncorrupt them, and utilize them in some spiritually purposeful fashion. Levi was the first, gave it over to his children, and ultimately his family, and ultimately now it becomes accessible for all of Klal Yisrael. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Eretz Hashem. We'll pick up Eretz Hashem tomorrow on Kuf Nun Beis, and tomorrow we'll get a little bit to Moshe Rabbeinu and the Maila of the Talmid Chacham. Shkoyach. All right, we'll say good morning. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors and thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Naftoli and Chava Tilson, with thank you to Naftoli's Chaver Benjamin Wohl for introducing him to the Daf. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with a shiur together in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Hashem. Thank Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin. May Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and may all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and to Hashem's Torah. And to thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for a refuah shlema for her grandson, Kobe Rofberg, Yaakov Zev Ben Tzivya Devora. May he have a refuah together with Kol Chole Yisrael. Both say, so with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Nun Zayin 57, and we are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, 4 lines down from the top. So we'll say, so the Gemara goes right there. So let's continue. So now we come to another discussion. Sorry. We come to remember we have been our topic so far. Actually, the last part of the Mishnah that we quoted at the end of yesterday's daf was that the sprinklings, the hazos that were done inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim were replicated outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim as well. So remember again, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we sprinkle the dam hapar, the blood of the ox, for a total of 8 sprinklings, right? I'm saying 8 altogether, 1 above, 7 below. We do the same thing with the dam hasoyer, right? With the blood of the goat. Same thing. The Gemara the Mishnah then said that we repeat this process outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, inside of the Kodesh, inside of the Beis HaMikdash itself. But now the Kohen stands facing the curtain, right? Remember, he's outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, facing the curtain, and he repeats the same sprinklings. It's the same thing, right? 8 sprinklings of the dam hapar. I say 8 altogether, you understand? Right? 8 sprinklings of the dam hasoyer. Shabbos says, so the Gemara says something very interesting. So the Gemara said, just remember, just go back one moment. In yesterday's daf, when the Gemara quoted the Brisa, and the Brisa said, "V'chein ya'aseh la'ohel moed, ma Talmud lomar, kishem shemaza lifnai v'lifnim, kach maza behechol." So the Gemara darshaned the pasuk. The pasuk said, "So shall you do in the Ohel Moed." Ohel Moed refers to the Beis Hamikdash itself, outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So shall you do in the Ohel Moed, and we learn from there that the Torah is going ahead and equating the Ohel Moed with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That whatever was done in the Holy of Holies is done again in the Beis HaMikdash itself. To which the Gemara raises a kasha. V'chidavar halamed behekish, chozer umalamed behekish. Could something that itself was learned out through a comparison go ahead and now teach another comparison? Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Kigon par shelamad b'matanas pnim achos lamalo minasiir behekish. Now listen to this. If you go back for just a moment and you put this all together, the way we learn out everything is actually quite interesting. We learn out that the blood of the par, has one blood application lamala. We learned that out from the saftey, because we compare the par to the saftey. Vasaftey sheva lamata, and the fact that we sprinkle the saftey 7 times below, we learn that out the hekish min par. We then go ahead, because we compare the saftey to the par. So we learn out the par and the saftey really from each other. They're compared to one another. So now what we're going to do, Abba says, as what? Is chozrin umalam de matanos shebifnim amatanos haparoches behekish divechin yaseli ohel moed. So Abba says, so what the Gemara is pointing out is something really fascinating. We learn out the par from the saftey and the saftey from the par. Because essentially what the Torah does is, interestingly enough, kind of express partial information by each carbon. And what we kind of do is equate them all together to say whatever is done by this one is done by that one. So Torah speaks about a sprinkling above by the saftey. We apply that to the par. So Torah speaks about 7 sprinklings below by the par. We apply that to the saftey, which is fine, not a problem. That's called the hekish. We compare things and we learn out from each other. The problem now is the Gemara wants to make a double hekish. So hekish number 1 is we're going to learn out par from saftey and saftey from par to give me the complete picture of what I do inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now there's going to be a second hekish that says, second comparison that says what? Whatever we do inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, we repeat again outside in the Heichal. And the Gemara says something very interesting. The Kaimalon Rashi says, the Kaimalon Mesechus Zvachim, De'in Lemeidin Bekodshim, Hekish Mina Hekish. I will say there is a concept when it comes to kachim, sacrificial law, that we do not learn out one hekish from another hekish. Just a concept, an exegetical concept. When it comes to sacrificial law, we don't learn out one hekish from another hekish. So as such, the Gemara says, how can you go ahead and learn out the blood applications in the Kodesh, in the Heichal, when effectively that's a hekish from a hekish? To which the Gemara says, "V'chi davar hamlo behekish chosm lo behekish, hay hemenu v'davar acherhu v'lo havi hekish." To which the Gemara says, in reality, it's not learning out a hekish from a hekish, but rather it's a hekish and a davar acher, a hekish and something else. What does that mean? Take again and look at Rashi. Hemenu v'davar acher, hekish rishon, lav hekishu. The first hekish is not really a full hekish. Why not? Shahari ben par ben saftey ksiv mala umato v'lo hutzruchu lilmod zemizeh ela es haminyon hilchach kol chad v'chad me'atzmo lavan mikzas v'davar acher mesayo b'mikzas ve'in zeh lamad behekish. So also listen to this. To which the Gemara says it's not true. In other words, by both par and saftey, there is a mention of lamala and lamata. Very important. Both saftey, there is a mention of sprinkling above and sprinkling below. So what do I have to learn out par from saftey? Is I have to learn out the numbering. In other words, most of what we learn out is 1 above, 7 below from a hekish. But the notion of sprinkling above and sprinkling below is explicitly stated both by par and both by saftey. So really, it's not a full hekish. It's what's called a hekish v'davar acher. Hekish v'davar acher means not a complete hekish. So when Rashi says that there's a principle in Zvachim of ein lemeidin hekish min hekish, you can't learn out one hekish from another hekish. That's only when it's a complete hekish. But this is not a complete hekish. Okay, so hanicha leman amar lo have hekish. So we'll say, so that's fine according to the opinion who says that halacha lemaisa it's not a complete hekish. Leman damar heavy hekish my ikel meimar. But according to the opinion that says hekish v'davar acher, even an incomplete hekish is still called a hekish. What is there to say? How are we able to learn out the sprinklings mi bachutz from the sprinklings mi bifnim? To which the Gemara says, "Ma'ikal meimar b'komosu degamre mehadadi." So we'll say ultimately again the Gemara says there are examples, so there are situations where you can learn one thing out of the other. What does that take? Look at Rashi. B'komosu degamre mehadadi. Ein ze hekish halamim min hekish. Shai behekish rishon lamdu behemos zu mizu v'ases damo kasher sal damapar ubehekish hasheni lo hulka shum davar laachas mina behemos. Little more, I'm supposed to listen to this. To which the Gemara says, even if you hold that there's two hekeshim or two hekeshos, they're two different things. The first hekesh, Rabbi say, was to do what? Was to go ahead and learn out the par from the shiur and the shiur from the par. The second hekesh is there not to teach me animals, but rather to teach me locations. And to teach me that which was done inside, ultimately, again, is done what? Is done outside as well. So apparently what the Gemara is suggesting is, even according to the opinion who holds of ein lemeidin hekesh min a hekesh, that's only pretty much when you want to use the same type of hekesh twice. But hekesh number one is learning animals out from each other, par from sorry from par, and hekesh number two is to go ahead and learn out geography. That which was done on the inside in the Kodesh or in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is also done in the Kodesh. Ibai Sema, the other possibility is chutz mi bifnim bechada zimna gamar. So this is very interesting. The other possibility is that it's all part of the same hekesh. That it's not two hekeshos, it's not really two comparisons, but rather ultimately, again, it's actually all part of the same limud. And simultaneously, when we go ahead and we learn what was done inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it is understood that the same avoda is replicated in the Kodesh as well. Good. So we'll say, so fine. So bottom line is that halacha l'maisa, there are two series, or there are two parts to the limud. Part number one is learning out the par from the sair and the sair and the par from the par in terms of what's done inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Remember again, both the dam of the par and the dam of the sair are treated identically, right? They're both going ahead, one above, 7 below in the sprinklings, and now we've learned out that the same exact process is replicated outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the coin facing the parochas, with the coin facing the curtain, 1 sprinkling above, 7 sprinklings below. What about the issue of ein lemeidin hekesh min a hekesh, to which the Gemara gives various answers. Beautiful. Tana, kishuhu mazeh, eino mazeh ala parochas, ela kineged parochas. So now both say, remember, we've officially transitioned from inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the Kodesh. Okay, that's where we are right now. So at this point in time, the coin, remember again, the coin, this is just if you just trace the progression. In yesterday's daf, we spent the bulk of our time focusing on 1 stand versus 2 stands. So we came out with what? 2 stands that I'm paskin, like the Rabban, like the Tanakam and the Mishnah. 2 stands, 1 for the Damapar, 1 for the Damasar. At this point, the Kohen is standing in the Kodesh. He's finished his avodah inside. Well, not finished totally, but for now, he's outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He's staring at the parochas, at the curtain, and he's now going to do the blood service opposite the curtain. He's going to do the same thing. It's 1 and 7 for the Dam HaPar, and 1 and 7 for the Dam HaSoyer. To which the Gemara says, when he sprinkles the blood on the parochas, he does not sprinkle really on the parochas, but really what? Kineged parochas, opposite the parochas, meaning the blood doesn't land on the curtain. Right? The blood, we'll say, and the system we said before, the same way, does the blood land on the aron? No. Right? We said this before, that what he does is he sprinkles in the direction of the aron, direction of the kapores, of the lid, 1 time by the lid, 7 times by what we'll call the body of the aron. But the same way that the blood doesn't go ahead and land by the aron, the blood also does not land on the parocha. So the Gemara says, really? Both it is incredible. I'm Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi. Ani re'ise beromi. I saw the parochas in Rome. Rabbi Yossi says, I saw the parochas in Rome. And v'hayu aleha kama tipe domim shalpar v'sar shil mekipurim. And I saw that on the parochas was the blood from the par and the sair of Yom Kippur. Incredible. Now, both sides. Now let's understand what is this talking about. Where does Rabbi Eliezer see the parochas in Rome? So if you look at Rashi, Anira isi beromi, Rashi says, B'meseches mi'ila gabe ben talmion na'asenes l'Rabbi Rabbi Yossi sheripe es bas melech Romi shenichnas shed begufa sheshmo ben talmion. But say, remember again, we actually saw this story in Me'ilah where Rabbi Eliezer was traveling on a mission to the Caesar to repeal a particular edict against the Jews. So what happened? A demon by the name of Ben Talmion Up here, Rabbi Eliezer says, what can I do to help? Generally, when Shadim offer their assistance, you should be a little suspicious, right? But again, Ben Talmion offers his assistance, and Rabbi Eliezer tells him what the mission is. So Ben Talmion possesses the Caesar's daughter. He enters the Caesar's daughter, he possesses her. And when Rabbi Eliezer shows up, he quote-unquote cures her. And the Caesar had such incredible gratitude. So what happened? Rashi goes on. So what happens? And the Caesar allows Rabbi Eliezer to enter into his treasure house and says, take whatever you want. Take whatever you want. So apparently, interestingly enough, one of the things that the Caesar used to keep in his treasure house were the edicts, which were written against the Jewish people. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't want any riches. He just goes to find the edict and asks that the edict be torn up. So while he's searching for the edicts in the treasure house, what does he find? V'sham ra klei beis hamikdash ba'otzar. Well, it's incredible. And while he's there, he sees various utensils of the Beis Hamikdash in the treasury of the king, of the Caesar. So Rabbi Eliezer says, I saw the parochas, I saw the curtain. And not only that, I saw the blood of the par and the blood of the sair on the parochas. I says, no, 1 second. V'dilma, the par helam davar shal tzibor, sirei avodah zara, hava chazi, the chaza. First of all, okay, you saw blood on the parochas, that's fine. But how do you know that that was the dam of the part of the dam of the son? I was supposed to say, there are other karbanos. Remember, most karbanos do not have blood applications opposite the parochas. The only 4 karbanos that have blood applications is the par of Yom Kippur, the sair of Yom Kippur, the par he'elam davar minat tzibor, which I will say is the case of the Sanhedrin, which issues an erroneous ruling, and Klal Yisrael acts on that ruling, and what we call si'irei avodah zara, which essentially is the same thing, except this time the erroneous ruling led to the worship of avodah zara. So they ask, okay, you saw blood. How do you know that it's the blood of the par, the sair of Yom Kippur? Maybe it's the par he'elam davar minat tzibor, the si'irei avodah zara. To which the Gemara says, the chaza ta'avidan kisidron. Oh, because they'll say what happened. He saw that the blood was arranged in an order. It was 1 and then 7. 1 and then 7. So also remember again, if this was the blood of the other karbanos, it would not have been arranged in such a systematic fashion. The fact that it was so orderly on the parochas led Rabbi Eliezer to believe that this was the blood of the Yom Kippur animals. So we'll say, you see from here that they would sprinkle the blood on the parochas. Utnan nami, we also learned gabe par he'elam davar shel tzibor. So we'll say, this is actually an alternate version of the story. By the par he'elam davar shel tzibor, so the Gemara says, ki ai gavna kishuhu mazeh lo hayu nogim beparochas. So we'll say, by the par he'elam davar minat tzibor. So remember again, this is the offering of the Sanhedrin. Once again, if the Sanhedrin issues an erroneous ruling, and what happens? Klal Yisrael acted on that ruling. So the Gemara says they would not sprinkle that blood on the parochas. Ve'im nagu, but if the blood reaches the parochas, it reaches the parochas. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, aniri ifsei baromi. So Rabbi Yossi says, I once saw this parochas in Rome. V'hayu aleha kama tipe damim shal par he'elam davar shal tzibor u'si'irei avodah zara. So we'll say there's an alternate version of the story. Rabbi Eliezer says, I was once in Rome, same story, only made one trip. I was once in Rome and I saw the parochas and I saw there was blood on the parochas. So you see from here that the blood of the par he'elam davar shal tzibor or the si'irei avodah zara did get on the parochas. To which the Gemara says, v'dilma the par v'sar shem kippurim. Maybe it was the blood of the par and the sar of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, "Dechazinu da'avidi shalo kesidron." No, it wasn't the blood of Yom Kippur. Why? Because the blood was not there in an orderly fashion. Had it been the blood of Yom Kippur, it would have been there. It would have been arranged in a more orderly fashion. So I will say, that's the end of that sugya. The Rambam paskins that the Kohen Gadol would not aim to get the blood on the curtain. In other words, the blood application on the parochas was treated the same way as the blood application on the Aron. Just as the blood application on the Aron, we'll call it, was a directional sprinkling. In other words, you would sprinkle in the direction of the Aron. the top of the aron, the body of the aron. So too when it came to the paroches, this was a directional sprinkling as well. But the goal was not to go ahead and get it on the curtain. I will say, now what happens if it gets on the curtain? What happens if it gets on the curtain? It gets on the curtain. Now remember, the good news is, what color was the paroches? Red. It was red, right? So again, now obviously, according to one of these versions over here, the blood did get on the curtain. But again, the blood, it's quite possible the blood got on, maybe the blood ended up getting on the curtain most of the time. That's possible, but that's not the halachic imperative. In other words, there's no problem if the blood gets on the curtain, but the halachic imperative doesn't, I should say, there is no halachic imperative to get the blood on the curtain. The Kohen Gadol is just obligated to sprinkle in the direction of the curtain, once above, 7 below. If it gets on it gets on it, but that's not the obligation. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, Nis'arvu lo damim v'damim. Supposed to listen to this interesting case. What happens if the blood gets mixed together? Now, what's the case here? Take a look at Rashi. This is the first wide line in Rashi. Damim b'damim, shal parvish shal sayer, kodem shenasan bifnim klum. So we'll say, here's the case. You have the two kelim, the two mizrakos, the two bowls of blood. Let's say the blood got mixed together. So before the Kohen Gadol did any blood applications in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, anywhere, so the blood of the par and the blood of the sayer got mixed together. What do you do? Nis'arvu lo damim b'damim. What do you do? Amar Rava. So Rava says, okay, what should I do? No sein achos lamala v'sheva lamata v'ola lo l'kan l'kan. So Rava says, look, the truth is, Yikachap over here, just do one set of blood applications. I will say, now you have one bowl of blood, right, which is a mixture, a combination of sayer blood and par blood. Rava says, great, just do one blood application above, 7 below, and what happens? That counts as both. Because effectively what you've done is you've sprinkled both bloods. So the rabbis run up with this. Amru kameid Rabbi Yirmiyah. So they said this before Rabbi Yirmiyah. They said over Rava's suggestion for Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Amar bavloi tipshai, foolish Babylonians. Mishum dedairi ba'ar dekashucha, amri shmaita demechashkon. Because they live in a dark place, they say such dark rulings. So we'll say, there was like a little bit of this animosity between the Talmidei Chachamim of Bavel and of Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was clearly displeased with Rava's suggestion. I'll say Bavel is called the dark place, Rashi points out, because Bavel Shayim Sula was situated like in a valley. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says, that is absolutely ridiculous. Rather, again, the Gemara says, Ha kayohev lamala desoyer mikame mato depar va'torah amra v'chila mechaper es hakodesh kilo damapar va'achakach kilo damasoyer. Supposed to listen to this. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Rav, I'll tell you why that makes no sense. I will say the halacha is that the order is first the dam hapar and then the dam hasoyer. That's the order. So to v'chila mechaper es hakodesh, you have to first finish up with the blood service of the par, and then you go to the blood service of the sayer. What's the problem with Rava's suggestion? So Rava says you just do 1 lamala, 7 lamata. So we'll say that 1 lamala. What's included in that one sprinkling above? Both the damapar and damasar. So it turns out that what you're sprinkling the upper sprinkling of the sayer before you've sprinkled the 7 lower ones of the par. And it doesn't work that way. You have to first do the blood applications of the par before you do the blood applications of the sayer. So Rabbi, that's a terrible suggestion. So what does Rabbi Yirmiyah suggest? Rabbi Yirmiyah, no sin achos lamala, v'sheva lamata l'shem par, v'chol zeve no sin achos lamala, v'sheva lamata l'shem asayer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah makes a different suggestion. He says, look, the blood is all mixed together, so what do? You're still going to do 2 blood applications. And in the first blood application, you're going to have kavana for the dam hapar. So first do 1 above and 7 below for the dam hapar, and then do 1 above and 7 below for the dam hasar. That's it. So essentially, what Rabbi Yirmiyah says is, you just have to treat it the same as if you had two different bowls of blood. The fact that the blood is so also what is interesting about this is you see from here that clearly the mixture of the bloods would not require you to go ahead and shecht new animals, which is interesting, right? Nowhere does the Gemara float the idea that if all the blood gets mixed together, then halacha l'maisa you have to shecht a new par, new sar, which is interesting. Instead, again, Rava suggests just do one combined sprinkling, one above, 7 below. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It doesn't make sense because again, the halacha is you first have to complete the blood applications for the par before you complete the blood applications for the sar. And according to Rava, you're starting the blood applications for the par even before you finish the sar. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, therefore, just do two applications. Have in mind that the first application, 1 above, 7 below, is for the par. Second one, 1 above, 7 below, is for the sire. Good. So the Gemara says as follows. Next case. Nis'arvulo damim b'damim b'matanos ha'achronos. So we'll say, what about the following case? What happens if the blood gets mixed together? But in this case, the Gemara says, b'matanos ha'achronos, with the latter blood applications. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Last Rashi in the Daf. So we'll say, here's what's happened over here. In this case, you had 2 bowls of blood. The Kohen Gadol has begun to do the blood application. And what happens over here is, remember again, I will say, the blood applications for the par happened before the sair. So in this case, the Kohen Gadol did the 1 blood application above for the par. So he started it. He did 1 above for the par. And then what happens? Somehow, the blood gets mixed together. Everything gets mixed together. So now what do we do? What do we do? So the Gemara said, well, so here we go. So nis'arvulo damim b'damim matanos ha'achronos. So remember in this case, see in the previous case, the blood got mixed together when? Before you did anything. Okay. Now what's happened over here is the Kohen Gadol began the blood applications for the par. All we got through was the 1 above for the par. Now everything got mixed together. What should I do now? So Sava Rav Papa Kamei de Rava Lemeimar. So Rav Papa thought to say, based on Rava's ruling, no saint Sheba Lamata L'Shem Par, U L'Shem Sayer, V'chozer V'no Saint Achas Lamala L'Shem Sayer. So Rav Papa, based on what Rava said previously, thought to say like this, not a problem. Go do the 7 sprinklings below, right? The 7 lower sprinklings, and have in mind that those 7 should work both for what? Par and sayer, and then go back and do 1 more above l'shem sayer. That's what Rav Papa thought to say based on Rava. Rava jumps in. Rava says, listen, I already got the brunt of Rabbi Yirmiyah's displeasure. Amrali Rava, ad hashta karulan tipshai. You know, those Eretz Yisrael Rabbanim, they've already called us Babylonians stupid. The hashta tipshai de tipshai. Now they're going to call us the stupid of the stupid, right? The foolish of the foolish. Why? Dikamegarina lahu v'lo gemiri. Because here they taught us and we're still unwilling to learn. So I will say, what Rava is going to say is like this. You know, the first time I interacted with Rabbi Yirmiyah, I made a mistake. Rabbi Yirmiyah showed me the folly of my ways. Now, if I continue to persist in this erroneous logic, we're going to be the foolish of the foolish. Which I will say, think about this profound yesod. What an incredible musar. So I will say, to make mistakes in life, all of us make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, right? And the truth is, we all do foolish and stupid things. But true folly is when you continue to repeat the same mistakes because of failure to learn from them. In other words, to make a mistake is excusable. To engage in a misstep is excusable. But to engage in a pattern of foolish and mistaken behavior, that's unforgivable. Because why are you not learning from your mistakes? So Rava says, okay, I got it. I was flawed in my logic. But to make the same mistake again, that's tipshoi minap tipshoi. That's the foolish of the foolish. Such an incredible yisod. So the Gemara says why. The Gemara says, "V'hakayov mata disoyer mikamei maila disoyer v'atorah amra tein lamaila v'achach lamata." Because listen to this. So the Gemara says, "I'll tell you why it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Why? Because at the end of the day, remember, what Rav Papa wanted to suggest was, go ahead, do the 7 below, and have in mind that the 7 below should be for what? The par and the sayer, and then go back and do 1 for the sayer. Here's the problem. Well, effectively, what you're doing again is you're sprinkling for the sayer before you've finished the par. And the Torah tells us first you have to complete the par service, and then you could go and do the sayer service. So therefore, now you have Rava pointing out to Rav Papa the folly in his ways. Ella, so what should we do? Amud Beis. Ella, Amar Rava, no sein shevel amata l'shem par. Rather, Rava says what you have to do is like this. Finish out the par service, right? So do the 7 sprinklings below for the par. V'chozer v'nosin achos lamala v'shevel amata l'shem sayer. And then go ahead and do the regular sayer service after. So we'll say, so Rava, kind of picking up on Rabbi Yirmiyah's cue from earlier. Just now the blood got mixed after the first blood application. So go ahead, finish out the par, do the 7 sprinklings of the par, and then go back and do 1 above and 7 below for the sayer. So we'll say, essentially it's the same theme over and over, which is that although ideally we want the blood to be separated, the bloods to be separated, if the bloods get mixed together, ultimately, you'll still continue to do 2 separate blood applications, looking at the mixture as separate forms of blood. Good. So we'll say, so again, it's the same, it's pretty much the same halacha in both cases. Next, nisarvulo kosos pekosos. Suppose an interesting case. So look at Rashi. Kosos pekosos, she'eno makir, iza kos shel par, ve'iza kos shel sayer. So we'll say, so now, in this case over here, once again, we don't know. See, let me say it a little bit differently. In the previous 2 cases, the blood was all poured into 1 receptacle. So I have 1 bowl of blood. So essentially, again, what the Gemara teaches me is, what do you do when you have 1 bowl of blood, mixed blood? You still continue to do 2 sets of applications, 1 for the par, 1 for the sayer. And that's true whether the bloods got mixed together before you began the applications, after you began the applications. You treat them as 2 separate bowls of blood. Good. But we'll say in this case, this is now a little bit different. This is where the bowls did not get mixed together, right? I have 2 bowls of blood, 1 of dama sayer, 1 of dama par. What's my problem? I don't know which is which. Now this is interesting. Now why is this interesting? Especially in light of what we learned yesterday. What did we learn yesterday? Right, that the truth is they do look differently. But again, it could also be, remember again, blood also changes in appearance and color when exposed to air. So it's also possible that after a sustained amount of time, maybe the coloration differences are not as noticeable. And maybe again, the thing, I don't know, whatever the mitzias is, the point over here is, in this case, the bloods are not getting mixed together. You have 2 bowls. I'm just not sure which one is dam apar and which one is dam hasayer. So said, so this is great. So what do you do with this? I mean, it's not great. I want to be clear. It's not good, but it's fascinating the way the Gemara deals with this. So listen to this. No sein, v'chozer v'nosein, v'chozer v'nosein shlosha pamim. So we'll say, in this case, what you do is, you do 3 blood applications. So essentially what you do is, we'll call it bowl. You have bowl A and bowl B. You do a blood application from A, a blood application from B, and then another application from A. What's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi. This is incredible. No sein v'chozer v'nosein v'chozer v'nosein v'chol avoda v'avoda no sin achas lamata v'sheva lamata min ha'echad v'chozer v'nosein min ha'sheni. So you're going to do 1 above 7 below from the bowl A. Then you're going to do 1 above 7 below from bowl B. V'chozer v'nosein min ha'sheni. Then you're going to go back and do a 3rd set of blood applications, 1 above 7 below from bowl A again. Why? Diman of shach. Listen to this. You're both saying, now remember again, the ikar when it comes to the blood avoda is which blood avoda has to be done first? Par. And I'm both remember again, it's ma'akev. If you do the blood avoda in the wrong order, it is ineffective. So the blood avoda of the par must come before the sayer. So watch this. Diman of shach. So we'll say, so what's my great problem in this case? What's my great problem in this case? I don't know which one is the par, which one is the sayer. So we'll say, essentially the Gemara says is like this. Tell it to you outside, then we'll see it inside. Essentially the Gemara says is, you do A, B, A 3 times. Why? Manav shach. If A is the par, and B is the sayer, right? Great, you're good to go. Okay, it's true, you did a third sprinkling then again of the par, but fine. But if A is the par, sorry, just the opposite. Let me say it again. If A is the par and B is the sayer, you're good to go. The fact you'll do a third one, you'll end up doing a third one ultimately of the par, doesn't hurt, fine. If, however, A is the sayer and B is the par, that doesn't work. So what do? You do again another A, that's the sayer. That way we forget about the first one, and you have ultimately again 2 and 3. So out of the 3, either 1 and 2 are going to be good, or 2 and 3 are going to be good, and this way you cover all of your bases. And I both say, not ideal, that's for sure. But lamaisa, at least I go ahead and I get it. And Ochoa tells you something very interesting. I know what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking, right? You're thinking to yourself, but one second. If A is the sayer, right, and B is the par, have you not invalidated the avoda? To which you see from the Gemara that apparently when you do the dam hasayer before the dam apar, it's as if you've done nothing. In other words, it's as if nothing has occurred. So essentially, we could view that first blood application as having not occurred at all, and we're not even going to look at 1 and 2. Instead, we're just going to look at 2 and 3. So you can see it inside Rashi. In Rishon shal par haya v'sheni yatsa b'rishon b'shniya. If A is the par and B is the sayer, then your yotze with sprinklings 1 and 2. The irishon shall sayer, but if bowl A is the sayer, hayavaharihu kimo she'eno, then we treat sprinkling number 1 as if it did not occur at all. Kidisanya par ma'aki v'sasar yatsa b'shnei b'shlishis shari kodim par l'sar v'chein beheichal. We'll say this is really incredible. So essentially, again, remember, as opposed to the first case, 2 cases that we just saw, where the bloods themselves are actually getting mixed together. In this case, I have 2 distinct bowls of blood. I just don't know which is which. The Gemara says, how do you deal with this? 3 sprinklings. 3 sprinklings, right? 1 and 7, ultimately from all 3. This way, whatever is whatever, ultimately, again, I have it covered. One of them is going to, either I'm going to be Yotze with 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, because I'll have the par before the sayer. Incredible. Miktsas damim nisarvulo. Umixas tamim lo nisavru. So it's an interesting case. What happens if some of the blood got mixed together, but some of the blood didn't get mixed together? And I both say, now what's the mitzvah in a case like this? Excuse me. So the Gemara says, sorry. So the Gemara says, look at Rashi, Miktsas damim nisarvu. Rashi says over here, he says, Kigon shenishpach mishnei mizrakos. Thank you so much. Thank you. Look at Rashi. Thank you. Miktas damim nisarvu kigon shenishpach mishnei mizrakos l'soch mizrak shlishi rekam v'nishtayir behem b'chol echad ve'echad. Suppose listen to this case. So I have 2 bowls, one of damapar, one of damasayer, and then what happens? So some of the blood from each of the bowls gets poured into or spills into a third utensil. So we'll say, so what's the shaila over here? So listen to this. So miktsas damim nis arvulo, miktsas damim lo nis arvulo. So pshita ki yohiv mivado in yohiv. So we'll say in this case over here, I know which is the par and which is the sayer. So obviously, I'm going to do the blood applications from which bowls? We'll call the non-mixture bowl. Right? Okay, so that's obvious. Miu hanach shirayim havu uli yisod azli ol dilma dechuyin havu va'azlin la'ama. Supposed to listen to this. What's the shaila? The shaila in this case is, what is the status of the contents of bowl number 3? See, I'm both saying, to understand, we spoke about this before. In a regular case, where you have a bowl of dama par, a bowl of dama soyer, did the Kohen Gadol end up using all of the blood in the bowl? No, there was always leftover. We'll say that leftover is called shirayim. That's a leftover of sacrificial blood. What do you do with leftover sacrificial blood? You pour it by the base of the mizbeach. That's different than what we call dechuyin. So you both say dechuyin ultimately again is invalid blood. And what would you do with invalid blood? you would pour that out into the channel. Remember, I saw this a number of times. There was a water channel which ran through the Azor, which ran through the Beis HaMikdash, which would kind of take out the refuse. So the shaila is the bowl in the blood in bowl number 3, right? So in this case over here, there's no blood ambiguity. In other words, I have the blood, I have the bowl of dam apar, the bowl of dam asoyer. Just some of both of the bloods got poured into a third bowl. So now obviously I know for the blood applications, I'm going to use the identifiable blood for the blood applications. The shaila is the blood that spilled into that third bowl. So what's the status of that blood? Is that called shirayim? And therefore I pour it out by the base of the mizbeach, or is it called dichuyin, in which case I'll pour it out by the channel? Rapapa says, so Rapapa will say, even according to the opinion who says that 1 cup of blood could make its fellow cup, could make the other cup of blood into channels. We'll say this is a case of where halacha l'maisa, the Kohen Gadol shechted a sacrifice, or the Kohen, doesn't mean Kohen Gadol, shechted a sacrificial animal, and did Kabbalah in 2 kalim. So you'll say normally you would do Kabbalah, you would receive the blood in 1 kli. In this case over here, the Kohen Gadol did Kabbalah in 2 kalim. So even according to the opinion who says that halacha l'maisa, if you do Kabbalah in 2 kalim, when you do zrika from 1 kli, the blood in the other kli is shirayim, which means it's poured out by the base of the mizbeach. Hanimili hecha di bay lemesav matziyoiv. That's because if you wanted to do zrika from either kli, you could do zrika from either kli. So whichever kli you don't end up using was a usable kli, and halacha l'maisa, the remnants will be spilled out by the yesod. Aval hai, but in this case over here, where the third kli has a mixture of blood, di boy l'meisav lo matzi yoevla. Bosa, if you wanted to use that blood in kli number 3, can you use that blood in kli number 3? No. So remember again, why can't you use the blood in kli number 3? Why not? Why not? Because remember, 1 and 2 are good. See again, so understand, technically speaking, you could use a kli that has mixed blood of dam apar dam asoyer when you have no choice. But in a case where you have a bowl of dam apar, a bowl of dam asoyer, and then a mixture bowl, obviously you can't use the mixture bowl. So I will say, ultimately, this blood is unusable. So because it's unusable, halacha l'maisa, it's not poured out by the yesod, by the base of the mizbeach, but rather it's allowed, you pour it into the channel. Amr li Rafuna, Brei Rav Yoshua Rapapa. Adrabah, I can say just the opposite. Afil leman damar kos echad osech habeiro dichui. So according to the opinion who says that in a stam case, when a Kohen does Kabbalah in 2 kalim, so ultimately again, the kli that he does zrika from, that's called the sacrificial blood. And the other kli is nidche, which means that blood is poured out by the channel. Hani mili didachye be'adayim. That's because you've actively set aside that blood for non-use. Aval heicha delo dachye be'adayim lo. But maybe in this case over here, of where the third kli, you're not actively setting anything aside for non-use. So perhaps ultimately, again, it should be usable. So the Gemara says, Disanya, because we learned in a Braisa, Lemalo omer ve'es damo yishpoch al yisod hamizbeach. So we'll say above we learned that you should spill out the blood by the yisod. Any leftover blood you spill out by the base of the mizbeach. Ulamatu omer ves kol dama yishpoch, and then later on it says all the blood shall be spilled out. Minayin lechata shekibel dama ba'arba kosos. So from where do we know that we'll say in a stomach case? Let's say by achatos, if you did Kabbalah in 4 kosos, so we'll say in this case over here the Kohen shechted the animal. And remember again, the classic case is you do Kabbalah in 1 kli. In this case in question, you did Kabbalah in 4 kalib, in 4 utensils. So the Gemara says, "V'nasan miza'achos u'miza'achos shebakula nishbachan liyisod." That I will say we'll discuss this idea, but ultimately the chatos has 4 blood applications. So what happens if by a chatos you did Kabbalah in 4 kalim and what? Did 1 application from each of the kalim, which you can do apparently. So the Gemara says, in that case, that the remnants of all 4 kalim are all what? Poured out by the yesod, by the base, which makes sense. Why? Because each of them were used for the zrika. Tamalomar ves kol damo yishboch yachal afilu nasan arba matanos mi'achas mehen. But what happens here? We'll say, let's say again, same case. I shechted the chatos. I did Kabbalah in 4 kelim, but only did the 4 blood applications from 1 kli, which meant that 3 of the kelim have sacrificial blood that was unused. How do I know? And you might have thought that you would still pour out the remnants of the other 3 by the yisod. Tamalomar ve'es damo yishpoch. Hu yish nishbach li yisod ve'hein nishbachen li amo. Ultimately, again, it is only the kli, which contains the blood that was actually used for the sacrificial applications, that is poured out by the yisod. But ultimately, again, the other blood is poured out where? In the amo, in the channel. So the Gemara Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon Omer, Minayin lechatos shekiba ba'arba kosos, b'nasan arba matanos me'echad mehen, shekulan nishbachen liyisod. So we'll say in the Gemara says, going back, Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon says, how do you know that by a chatos? So let's remember again, a chatos has 4 blood applications. How do I know that if I shechted a chatos, received the blood, did Kabbalah, in 4 different kosas, 4 different kelim, and ultimately, again, v'nasan arba matanos me'achad mehen, and I did all 4 blood applications from one of the kosos, from one of the bowls, and the other 3 were left unused. Did I still pour out the remnants of the other 3 by the yisod? Ultimately, again, Talmud Lomar ves kol dama yishpoch. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, hakse ves dama yishpoch. Amrabashi lemeuti shirayim shebet savar behema. Ultimately, I'm going to say, what does this come to exclude? This comes to exclude. So we'll say, Rabbi Eliezer's position is that halacha lamaisa, when you do Kabbalah of a chatas in 4 kelim, even though you're only going to use 1 kli for the zrika, all four, the remnants are poured out by the yisod. So what does Rabbi Eliezer do with the fact that the pasuk seems to indicate that only blood used for avoda, right, is poured out by the yisod, but other blood is poured out by the amo? So what is it coming to exclude? According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's coming to exclude blood that is left in the neck of the animal. That I will say, if you have a following situation, that halacha l'maisa, the kohen shechs the animal, does Kabbalah. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, even if he does Kabbalah in 4 kelim and only uses 1 of those kelim for zrika, all 4 are poured out by the yisod. But if more blood seeps out of the neck of the animal after Kabbalah was done, that blood goes into the amma. Right? That blood is allowed to just go into the channel and it is not poured out by the yisod. Okay, we'll say that's by chatos. What about, we'll say, let's go back for just a moment. What was our shaila? Our shaila was, remember again, in this case, I have 3 bowls of blood, right? Bowl number 1 was what? Damapar. Bowl number 2 was damasoyer. Bowl number 3 was a mixture. Some blood from the other 2 bowls poured into, ultimately, again, that 3rd bowl. What was our shaila? Our shaila was that halacha l'maisa, what do I do with the blood of that 3rd bowl? So I know the blood of, right, the leftover blood from the par, the leftover blood from the soyer, that's going to be poured out by the yisod. What do I do with the blood in bowl number 3? Is that poured out on the yisod, right, by the base nozeh, or is that poured out in the amma? The Rambam paskins Rabosai, it is poured out by the amma. It is poured out by the channel. It is not poured out by the base of the mizbeach. And the logic being that it is only sacrificial blood that was used in the context of avoda, that halacha l'maisa is poured out by the yisod. But that blood in the 3rd bowl, which was never really used, never really usable sacrificially, because remember again, you had the 2 pure bloods of the damapar and damasar. That blood in the 3rd bowl was never really usable sacrificially, and therefore halacha l'maisa, the Rambam paskins that halacha l'maisa, all of that is poured out. I'm sorry, the Rambam paskins that the blood of the 2 bowls of the damapar damasar, any remnants will be poured out by the yisod, by the base of the mizbeach, but the blood of the 3rd bowl, which is the mixture blood, not usable for avoda, poured out by the amma. By the chatas, say the Rambam paskins, that if you have a situation where the kohen did Kabbalah in 4 kelim, Einachinami, again, because Kabbalah was actively done in 4 kelim, and all 4 kelim all contain dama chatos, even if you do all 4 blood applications from 1 kli, all of that blood is poured out by the yisod. All right, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Eretz Hashem at the 2 dots tomorrow.